In Season 5, Episode 14 of Adventure Time, a 47-year-old man in a tattered suit sings the theme from Cheers to a 7-year-old girl while fighting off a horde of slime-eyed mutants in the ruins of a dead civilization. He sings because the crown on his head is eating his mind, and if he stops singing, he will forget her name. When it is over, when the creatures are frozen and the silence returns, the girl hugs him and says she loves him. He looks down at her and says, "I love you too, Gunter." Her name is Marceline. That is the moment the crown won. This is a story about losing yourself one thought at a time. If you have not already, subscribing to this channel is free and it genuinely helps us keep making these long, quiet videos for you. There is a tape. It is old, the image warped and jittering. The kind of video that looks like it was never meant to be found. It sits among dozens of other tapes, most of them unwatchable, full of nonsense and bad jokes, and an old man shouting at penguins. But this tape is different. On this tape, a man with dark hair and round glasses sits in front of the camera, calm, measured, speaking as though he knows this is the last clear thing he will ever say. He introduces himself. His name is Simon Petrikov. He is an antiquarian. He studies old things left behind by people who no longer exist. He does not know yet that he is about to become one of those things. This is the tape that changed Adventure Time. It aired on December 5th, 2011, inside a two-part episode called Holly Jolly Secrets, the 19th and 20th episodes of the show's third season. Written and storyboarded by Kent Osborne and Samvele Sayaphone. From a story by Mark Banker, Kent Osborne, Patrick McHale, and series creator Pendleton Ward. 2.513 million viewers watched that episode. For nearly 60 episodes before this moment, the Ice King had been a joke. He was the show's most persistent villain, a blue-skinned old man who kidnapped princesses because he was lonely, who was defeated every single time because he was never really dangerous, who lived in an ice castle with penguins he called Gunter and spoke to as though they understood him. He was pathetic in a way that the show acknowledged openly, leaned into, even celebrated. He existed so that Finn and Jake would have someone to fight who never truly threatened them. His schemes were always doomed. His loneliness was always the punchline. Pendleton Ward once described the Ice King as a pathetic character and said he enjoyed a villain that you fall in love with. That statement is worth sitting with because it tells you something about the philosophy behind Adventure Time's construction. The villain you fall in love with, not the villain who frightens you, not the villain who challenges you, the villain who makes you ache. Ward was building, from the very beginning, a character designed to shift registers, to start as comedy and become tragedy, to teach the audience that pity and laughter can coexist in the same breath, that the person you make fun of might be the person whose story breaks your heart. And then the tape played, and the man on the tape was not the Ice King. The man on the tape was a scholar, a researcher, a professor of archaeology who had earned a PhD, a person who purchased a jeweled crown from a dock worker in northern Scandinavia because it was beautiful. And because he studied beautiful old things, he brought it home to show his fiancée, a woman named Betty Groff, and he put it on his head just for a laugh, just to see how it looked. And the crown showed him visions, maddening, impossible visions that tore through his consciousness like ice through still water. He took the crown off, the visions stopped. But something had already changed. Something had already latched on. A bond had formed between Simon and the artifact, a bond that the crown had been designed to create. A bond that could not be undone by simply removing the crown from your head. The damage was done in the moment of first contact. Everything that followed was just the slow unfolding of that initial fracture. Betty left him. The show does not dramatize this departure in that first tape. It simply states it the way you state something that happened so long ago. The grief has become geological. She saw what the crown was doing to him, the way his behavior changed after he wore it. The visions, the erratic outbursts. The personality shifts that came without warning and left without explanation, and she ran. In the Holly Jolly Secrets reveal, Simon describes this with a flatness that is more devastating than any scream could be. He does not blame her. He does not even seem surprised. He simply notes her absence the way you might note a change in the weather, as something that happened, something he could not prevent, something that altered the landscape of his life permanently and without appeal. There is a kind of grief that is so old it no longer presents as grief. It presents as fact. Betty left. The sky is blue. The crown is cold. These are just things that are true. The genius of this reveal, the thing that elevated Adventure Time from a very good cartoon into something approaching great art, is that it retroactively rewrites every single Ice King episode that came before it. Every kidnapping of Princess Bubblegum is suddenly not just a joke about a lonely old man. It is a man with a destroyed mind repeating a pattern he cannot understand, reaching out for a woman who looks vaguely like someone he once loved, someone whose name he cannot remember. someone whose face he can no longer quite assemble in his thoughts. The obsessive kidnapping, the desperate proposals, the frantic need to be near a princess, any princess, is not villainy. It is the residue of love filtered through a broken mind, emerging as compulsion where it once was tenderness. Every time he calls his penguins Gunter, he is not being quirky. He is echoing a name that was burned into the crown itself 65 million years before he was born. A name he does not know the origin of. A name that the crown forces him to repeat because it is the crown's deepest, most broken memory, not his. Think about what that recontextualization means for the experience of watching the show. You could watch the entire first 2 seasons of Adventure Time, 60 episodes of comedy and adventure and silliness, without ever suspecting that the annoying blue man who steals princesses was once a human being named Simon, who wore round glasses and loved a woman named Betty and studied artifacts for a living. You could laugh at him, dismiss him, forget about him the moment his episodes ended. And that is part of the design. The reveal works because the audience has been doing exactly what the crown does. The audience has been looking at the Ice King and seeing only the Ice King, the surface presentation, the symptoms, the behavior. The reveal forces you to look again, to look deeper, to understand that beneath the slapstick and the shouting and the princess kidnapping, there is a person. There was always a person. You just were not paying attention. Adventure Time premiered on Cartoon Network on April 5th, 2010. It ran for 10 seasons and 283 episodes, concluding on September 3rd, 2018, with a 44-minute finale called Come Along With Me that was watched by 920,000 viewers and scored a 0.25 Nielsen rating in the 18 to 49 demographic. In those 8 years, the show evolved from a surreal comedy about a boy and his magical dog into something that routinely interrogated mortality, identity, trauma, and the nature of consciousness itself. It explored everything from the mathematics of time loops to the ethics of artificial intelligence, to the question of whether a piece of gum can have a soul. But no single thread in that vast, sprawling narrative carries more emotional weight than the story of Simon Petrikov. No single character embodies the show's deepest themes more completely, because Simon is not just a tragic backstory attached to a comic relief villain. Simon is the show's central argument about what it means to love someone you are losing, and what it means to be the person who is lost. To understand why the crown destroys Simon, you have to go back further than Simon. You have to go back further than human civilization. You have to go back 65 million years to a time when the word human had no meaning, to an episode that aired on November 6th, 2014, in the show's 6th season. Episode 24, Evergreen. This is one of the most important episodes in the entire Adventure Time mythology, and it contains no humans, no Land of Ooo, no Finn, no Jake, no Marceline. It is set in the Cretaceous period among dinosaurs and 4 elemental beings who govern the world, one for each classical element: fire, ice, candy, slime. The ice elemental is named Urgence Evergreen. He is brilliant, powerful, arrogant, and deeply unkind. He has an apprentice, a small dinosaur he also calls Gunter, who worships him despite being treated with constant dismissal and contempt. This relationship, the relationship between Evergreen and his Gunter, is the seed from which Simon's entire tragedy grows. Think about that for a moment. Think about the storytelling ambition required to trace a character's suffering back 65 million years, to root a modern emotional catastrophe in the psychology of a dinosaur and its cold, distant master. Adventure Time operated on timescales that most television cannot even conceptualize, and it did so not for spectacle, but for emotional precision. The show wanted you to understand exactly why the crown does what it does, and to understand that, you had to see where the crown came from and what was wrong with it from the very beginning. A comet is coming. It is not just any comet. It is the same recurring catalyst comet that appears throughout Adventure Time's mythology, the cosmic event that periodically reshapes life on the planet, the event that will eventually become the Lich, the show's most terrifying antagonist. Evergreen proposes a solution to the other elementals. He will create a crown, a magical artifact designed to grant its wearer their deepest wish. His plan is straightforward. He will put the crown on, and his deepest wish, the destruction of the comet, will be enacted. The comet will be stopped. The world will be saved. He builds the crown with a bonding spell, a crucial detail that the episode emphasizes, so that the mind of the first person to wear it will be imprinted on the artifact forever. The crown will be molded by its first wearer. It will carry their psyche, their desires, their deepest emotional architecture, as a permanent template for every subsequent wearer. But things go wrong. The other elementals oppose Evergreen's plan. There is a confrontation. Evergreen is incapacitated, injured too severely to reach the crown himself. His apprentice, little Gunter the dinosaur, is the only one left. The comet is approaching. Time is running out. Gunter reaches the crown. Gunter puts it on his head, and the crown grants Gunter's deepest wish. But Gunter's deepest wish is not to destroy the comet. Gunter has never thought about the comet. Gunter is a child, a neglected child who has spent his entire life seeking approval from a master who withholds it reflexively, who dismisses Gunter's attempts at connection, who treats his apprentice as an annoyance rather than a responsibility. Gunter's deepest wish is to be like Evergreen, to be seen by him, to be worthy of him, to become him. The crown transforms Gunter into a grotesque miniature version of Evergreen, blue-skinned, long-nosed, ice-powered, and Gunter begins screaming the only word the crown now associates with the master-apprentice bond. Gunter, no. Gunter, no. Gunter, no. Over and over the way Evergreen used to scold him, because that is the closest thing to love Gunter ever received. The crown heard Gunter's wish and interpreted it through the only emotional vocabulary Gunter possessed, and that vocabulary was made entirely of rejection and longing. The comet hits, the dinosaurs die, Evergreen dies, Gunter dies, Nina, the fire elemental's apprentice who tried to help, dies. Everything dies, the world burns and freezes and is remade, and the crown survives. It survives because it was built to survive, because Evergreen was a genius who made his artifacts durable, because the magic woven into its structure is older and stronger than the life it was meant to protect. The crown lies dormant for 65 million years, buried in the geological strata of a planet that has moved on, carrying inside it the imprint of a child's unfulfilled desire, a child's broken heart, a child's desperate need to be seen and acknowledged by the one person who refused to see and acknowledge him. Think about the cosmic irony of this. Evergreen built the crown to save the world. He built it with care and with genius and with the specific intention of stopping the comet, of preserving life, of being a hero. And the thing he built, the thing that was supposed to be his greatest achievement, became the instrument of the world's most persistent tragedy. Not because the crown malfunctioned, not because there was a flaw in the design, because Evergreen failed as a parent, because he could not be bothered to treat his apprentice with kindness, because he was too brilliant and too arrogant and too consumed by his own importance to notice that the small creature following him around, the creature he dismissed and scolded and ignored, was watching everything he did, was absorbing every lesson, was building an entire emotional architecture around the experience of not being loved enough. The crown is, in the most literal sense, a monument to Evergreen's failure as a caretaker. It is a weapon that was sabotaged by neglect, and the sabotage echoes through 65 million years of history, touching every person the crown touches, inflicting Evergreen's failure on minds that never knew him, in an era that never heard his name. And here is what that means for Simon Petrikov, millions of years later, when he picks up that crown in a shop in Scandinavia and puts it on his head for a laugh. The crown was never meant for him. The crown was never meant for anyone after Evergreen. It is a broken wish-granting machine, permanently imprinted with the psyche of a neglected child who wanted nothing more than to be noticed by his cold, distant master. Every person who wears the crown does not simply gain ice powers. They are slowly, irrevocably overwritten by the crown's original imprint. They become a version of Evergreen, because that is what the crown's first wearer wished for. Their skin turns blue, their nose elongates, their body temperature drops to 30 degrees Celsius, or 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Their hair turns white, their teeth sharpen, their memories dissolve, replaced by the crown's own memories, which are not memories at all, but the emotional echoes of a relationship that ended 65 million years ago. They begin calling everyone around them Gunter, because that is what Evergreen called his apprentice, and the crown cannot distinguish between bearers. To the crown, everyone is Gunter. Everyone is the child who is never loved enough. This is what makes Simon's story so profoundly structurally tragic. He is not being punished for a choice he made. He is not paying a price for hubris or greed or ambition. He did not seek the crown for power or wealth or immortality. He picked it up because he was curious, because he was a scholar, because studying old artifacts was his life's work. And this was an old artifact, and it was beautiful. He is being consumed by the unresolved grief of a creature that died 65 million years before he was born. The crown does not care about Simon. The crown does not even know Simon exists. It only knows that it must create Evergreen over and over, in every mind it touches, because that is the wish that was burned into its circuitry at the moment of its activation. Simon Petrikov is collateral damage in a tragedy that has nothing to do with him. He is a bystander destroyed by a wound he did not cause, a victim of someone else's pain carried forward through deep time, like radiation through rock. And yet he fought it. For years he fought it. The tapes in Holly Jolly Secret show the progression, and if you pay attention, if you really watch, you can trace the dissolution of a human identity in real time. The early recordings are coherent, articulate, precise. Simon speaks like the scholar he is, documenting what is happening to him with clinical detachment. He notes the physical changes with the specificity of a man who has spent his career observing artifacts and cataloging their properties. The blue tinge spreading across his skin, the way his nose seems to be elongating, slowly, imperceptibly, like continental drift measured in millimeters per year. The headaches that come and go like weather systems, each one leaving him slightly different than it found him. He records all of this because that is what a researcher does. You observe, you document, you hope that the data will outlast you, that the record will survive even if the recorder does not. But the later tapes are different. The later tapes are fractured, disjointed, full of long pauses where Simon seems to lose the thread of his own thought, where he starts a sentence and cannot remember how it was supposed to end, where he reaches for a word that should be right there, right on the edge of his tongue, and finds only empty space. His voice changes, his vocabulary shrinks, not gradually, but in sudden drops, like a staircase going down. Words he used confidently in earlier tapes become unavailable to him. Complex sentence structures give way to simple ones. He begins to sound less like a professor and more like a child, petulant and confused and frightened, aware that something is wrong but unable to articulate what it is with the precision he once possessed. There is a tape where he talks about Betty, and you can see the exact moment when the name begins to slip away from him. He reaches for it, and it is not quite there, and the frustration on his face is the frustration of a man trying to hold water in his hands. He knows the name. He knows the name. He can feel the shape of it, the weight of it, the emotional significance attached to it, but the actual syllables, the specific sounds that constitute the name of the woman he loved, are dissolving, becoming blurred, becoming a feeling without a word attached to it. And you watch this happen. You watch a man lose the name of the woman he loved, and you know that this is not the last thing he will lose. This is just one loss among thousands, one tile removed from a mosaic that is slowly, methodically being dismantled, piece by piece, until the image is unrecognizable. He knows what he is losing. That is the cruelest part. For a long time, he knows exactly what he is losing, and he cannot stop it. He can see the shore receding. He can feel the current pulling him. And there is nothing he can do, no amount of effort or will or love or intelligence that can keep him in place. The current is stronger than he is. It has always been stronger. The only question was how long he could resist it. And the answer, it turns out, is not long enough. Never long enough. If you have ever watched someone you love deteriorate, you know this feeling. You know the specific horror of seeing recognition flicker and fade in someone's eyes. Of watching a person who used to know your name struggle to place your face, of sitting across from someone who is physically present but mentally somewhere else entirely, somewhere you cannot follow, somewhere they cannot come back from. You know the way it feels to realize that the conversation you are having is the last real conversation you will ever have with this person. And you did not know it was the last one until it was over. Until the next visit when the words were wrong and the eyes were empty and the person behind them had taken one more step into the dark. Adventure Time understood this horror instinctively, and it had the courage to make it the emotional backbone of a children's cartoon. Novelist Lev Grossman spoke about this on NPR in 2013, and what he said has stayed with me since. He was talking about his father, who was going through Alzheimer's at the time, and he said that he looked at his father and thought, "This cartoon is about my father dying." That is not hyperbole. That is not a creative interpretation applied retroactively to a piece of media that was not thinking about these things. The parallels between Simon's crown-induced degeneration and Alzheimer's disease are so precise, so carefully drawn, that they can only be intentional. The memory loss that starts at the edges and works inward. The personality changes that arrive without warning and refuse to leave. The lucid moments that are somehow worse than the confusion, because in those moments the person knows they are disappearing and can do nothing about it. The way the disease does not just erase the patient but reshapes them, turning them into someone the people who love them do not recognize. Someone who walks with the same gait and speaks with the same voice, but is, in every way that matters, a stranger. That is the Crown. That is exactly what the Crown does. And the show knew it. The show always knew it. And this is where Marceline enters the story, and this is where the story becomes almost unbearable. But first, it is worth pausing to consider what the show does with the Ice King in the seasons between Holly Jolly Secrets and I Remember You, and in all the seasons that follow. Because the Ice King does not stop being funny after the reveal. That is the remarkable thing. The show does not suddenly treat him as purely tragic. He is still ridiculous. He still kidnaps princesses. He still makes terrible fan fiction, writing elaborate stories about himself and Fiona and Cake. Gender-swapped versions of Finn and Jake that exist, it turns out, inside his imagination. Placed there by the crown as a kind of creative outlet for a mind that has been stripped of everything else. He still shouts at his penguins. He still bothers Finn and Jake. He still does all the things that made him a comedic figure in the first place. But now, you know. And knowing changes everything. Every joke lands differently when you understand that the man making you laugh used to be someone else. That the behavior you are laughing at is a symptom. That the loneliness driving every scheme and every kidnapping and every desperate bid for attention is not a character flaw, but a wound. The show trusts you to hold both reactions simultaneously, the laughter and the ache, and it never asks you to choose between them. This is, in a very real sense, the experience of loving someone with a cognitive disorder. You laugh because they say something absurd, you ache because you know why they said it. The two responses coexist, and neither one cancels the other, and the space between them is where grief lives. There is a Neil Strauss profile of Pendleton Ward in Rolling Stone that notes the physical similarities between Simon Petrikov and Ward himself. The round glasses, the large beard, the strong desire for social interaction. Ward put something of himself into Simon, or at least something of his anxieties. The fear of disappearing. The fear that the person you are might not survive contact with the world you live in. These are not abstract fears. They are human fears, specific and personal and universal. And they are the engine that drives Simon's story from beginning to end. The Mushroom War happened sometime between the 1980s and the early 2000s. The show never gives an exact date, but the clues are consistent and specific. The technology scattered through the ruins, the VHS tapes and CRT televisions and analog cameras and cars from that era, places the war roughly in that window. References to television shows like Cheers, which aired from 1982 to 1993, and which Simon clearly watched and loved, further narrow the timeline. It was a global nuclear conflict that ended human civilization as we know it. A mutagenic bomb detonated over what was once North America, leaving a crater visible from space. 3 major explosions that scarred the planet, 2 on either side and 1 even larger, mutating the survivors into the strange creatures that would eventually populate the land of Oo. Almost every human being on the planet died. The world as Simon knew it, the world of universities and libraries and research grants and evening television, ended in fire and silence. Simon survived because the crown kept him alive. That is the bargain the crown offers, whether you want it or not. It does not ask permission. It does not negotiate terms. It gives you power. It gives you immortality. And it takes everything else. Your face, your memories, your name, your relationships, your understanding of who you are and why you matter, your ability to recognize the people who love you, your capacity to hold a thought for longer than a moment, yourself in every sense of the word. Simon survived the apocalypse, but he survived it as a man actively becoming someone else, a man whose mind was being rewritten in real time by a 65-million-year-old wish that had nothing to do with him. He walked through the ruins of his species as the last man alive, and he was not even that, not fully. He was the last man partially alive, the last man in the process of ceasing to exist while his body continued to function. And in the wreckage of that dead world, he found a girl. Marceline was young, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, half demon by birth through her father Hunson Abadir, the ruler of the Nightosphere, but still just a child, alone in the ruins of everything that had ever existed. Her mother was gone. Her father was absent, as demonic fathers tend to be. She was crying. She was alone in a way that no child should ever be alone, in a world that offered nothing but wreckage and danger and the slow mutation of everything familiar into something unrecognizable. The flashback in I Remember You, that heartbreaking episode storyboarded by Rebecca Sugar and Cole Sanchez, from a story by Patrick McHale, Kent Osborne, and Pendleton Ward, Season 4, Episode 25, which aired on October 15, 2012 and was watched by 2.535 million people, shows Simon finding Marceline crying in the wreckage of a city. He runs to her. He does not hesitate. He does not assess the situation. He does not calculate the risk. He sees a child in pain, and he goes to her. And he finds a stuffed bear in the ruins of a nearby toy store, a ratty little thing that Marceline will name Hambo and carry for nearly 1,000 years, and he gives it to her. She stops crying. She looks up at him, and in that moment, a bond forms that will stretch across a millennium of history, across the complete dissolution and reconstruction of Simon's identity, across the death of the world and the birth of a new one. Simon became Marceline's protector. He cared for her in the aftermath of the Mushroom War, scavenging for food, finding shelter in the gutted buildings and shattered infrastructure of the old world, keeping her safe from the mutated creatures that roamed the irradiated landscape. He was everything to her, Father, friend, guardian, storyteller, comedian, the only stable presence in a world that had been unmade. He acted out episodes of Cheers to make her laugh, performing both roles in conversations from a sitcom that no longer existed for an audience of one, in the ruins of a world that no longer had television or laughter or sitcoms or any of the things that made those words meaningful. He sang her songs, he made up stories. He gave her Hambo, a stuffed bear he found in the ruins of a toy store, and that bear became the most important object in Marceline's life. A physical proof that the man who gave it to her had existed and had been kind and had cared about whether she was crying. Marceline would carry Hambo for nearly 1,000 years. She would lose him eventually when her boyfriend Ash sold him to a witch named Maja, and the show devoted an entire episode, Sky Witch in Season 5, to Marceline and Princess Bubblegum retrieving him. The fact that the show gives an entire episode to the recovery of a stuffed bear tells you everything you need to know about what Hambo represents. He is not a toy, he is a document. He is the last surviving artifact of Simon Petrikov's love. The one physical object that connects the present to the past, the immortal vampire queen to the mortal antiquarian who found her crying in the rubble and decided, without hesitation, that she mattered more than anything the crown could take from him. Hambo is the letter and the tape and the photograph all rolled into one, a thing that exists because someone who no longer remembers making it once loved someone enough to give them a gift. Simon did all the things that parents do, all the small, patient, repetitive acts of care that constitute love in its most practical form. And every time a threat appeared, every time the slime-eyed monsters came too close, he put on the crown, because the crown gave him the power to protect her. And every time he put on the crown, he lost a little more of himself. A memory here, a word there, a connection between two thoughts that used to be solid and reliable, and is now suddenly, inexplicably, gone. This is the impossible equation at the center of Simon's story. The equation that has no solution, the equation that defines every choice he makes from this point forward. The only way to keep Marceline safe is to use the crown. The only way to remain Simon is to never use the crown. He cannot do both. He cannot protect the person he loves and remain the person she loves. The crown will save her body and erase her father. Those are the terms. There is no negotiation. There is no loophole. There is no third option. There is only the choice, made again and again, each time the danger comes, each time the creatures close in, each time a 7-year-old girl looks up at him with trust in her eyes and he reaches for the crown because he would rather lose himself than lose her. Think about what that choice means, enacted repeatedly, over months and years. Think about a man who wakes up every morning knowing that today might be the day the crown takes the last piece of him that matters. Think about a man who goes to sleep every night wondering whether he will remember Marceline's name in the morning. Think about the specific, grinding terror of that existence. The way every use of the crown is a gamble, every rescue a transaction in which the currency is his own identity, and the exchange rate is always getting worse. One rescue costs one memory, the next costs two. The next costs something he cannot even name, some quality of thought or feeling that is simply absent the next morning, like a piece of furniture removed from a room while he was sleeping. Season 5, Episode 14. Simon and Marcy. This is the episode with the Cheers theme song, the one that aired on March 25, 2013, and it is perhaps the most perfect distillation of this impossible choice that the show ever produced. The episode opens with Marceline, Finn, Jake, and the Ice King playing basketball at Marceline's house. Finn and Jake ask why she invited the Ice King. Marceline tells them the story. She tells them about 996 years ago, about a man named Simon Petrikov, about the ruins and the slime and the Cheers theme song and the crown. Simon and Marceline are wandering through the ruins of civilization. Marceline is sick. She needs food, specifically chicken soup, because that is what you give sick children, even at the end of the world. Simon tries to find soup, tries to make her laugh by acting out scenes from Cheers through a broken television set, performing both sides of a conversation from a show that no one will ever watch again, in a bar that no longer exists, in a world that no longer remembers what a bar was. He tries to be a father in a world that no longer has any use for fathers, and the effort is simultaneously heroic and heartbreaking, because the very act of pretending that things are normal, that a sick child needs soup and laughter and care, is itself an act of defiance against the apocalypse that surrounds them. Marceline throws a snowball at Simon's head to knock the crown off. She has seen what it does. She has watched the effects linger longer each time, the blue skin taking longer to fade, the strange words taking longer to stop. She makes Simon promise never to put the crown on again. And he promises, because that is what you do when a 7-year-old asks you to promise something. You promise. You look into their eyes and you say the words and you mean them with everything you have, even when you know somewhere in the back of your mind, in the part of your mind that the crown has not yet reached, that you will not be able to keep this promise, that the world will not let you keep it. And then the creatures come. Mutated beings that ooze slime from their eye sockets and mouths, drawn to noise, drawn to movement, relentless and numerous and horrible. Simon and Marceline run. They reach a dead end, an alley with no way out. The creatures close in. The 7-year-old girl who asked him to promise stands behind him, and the creatures stand in front of him. And the crown sits on the ground between them, and the choice is the same choice it always is, the only choice it ever is. Protect her and lose yourself. Keep yourself and lose her. Choose. Simon puts the crown on, and to anchor himself, to hold on to some shred of who he is while the crown tries to erase him, he sings. He sings the Cheers theme, the theme from a television show about a bar where everybody knows your name. Think about that. Think about the specific cruelty of that lyric in this context, where everybody knows your name. Simon is singing about being known, about being recognized, about belonging somewhere, while wearing an artifact that is actively erasing his ability to know, to recognize, to belong. The song is a lifeline and it is also a eulogy. He is singing about the thing the crown is taking from him at the very moment it is being taken, where everybody knows your name and they are always glad you came. He sings it over and over, a desperate mantra, a rope thrown into the dark water of his own dissolving mind. And it works. Barely. He unleashes a blast of ice that freezes the creatures. He takes the crown off, but this time the effects do not fully recede. His skin stays blue, his nose stays long, his eyes remain altered, the beard shrinks, but it does not disappear. The crown has taken another piece of him, a larger piece than before, and it is not giving it back. The exchange rate has changed. The cost of protection has gone up. The next time will be worse. The next time will take more. And there will be a next time because there is always a next time. Because the world is full of dangers and Marceline is small and the crown is the only weapon he has. And then Marceline hugs him and says she loves him. And he looks at her, and for one horrible second you can see the confusion in his eyes, the way his gaze moves across her face, as though he is trying to assemble a puzzle from pieces that no longer quite fit. And he says, "I love you too, Gunter." He called her Gunter. He called the girl he has been protecting, the child he has fed and sheltered and sung to sleep, by the name of a dinosaur that died 65 million years ago. Because the crown does not know the difference. Because to the crown, every loved one is Gunter. Every relationship is the same broken relationship, the same neglected child, reaching for the same cold master, over and over, forever. The crown has one template for love, and it is a broken template, a template made of longing and rejection, and it imposes that template on every bond it encounters. That single word, Gunter, spoken in that moment of tenderness, carries the full weight of Simon's tragedy. He is still capable of love. The crown has not destroyed that. The capacity for connection, the impulse to care, the warmth that drove him to pick up a crying girl in the ruins of a dead world, all of that is still there. But the crown has corrupted the channels through which that love travels. He feels what he has always felt for Marceline, but the name, the specific, irreplaceable name of the person he loves, has been overwritten. The emotion remains. The identity is gone. And that is, in many ways, a perfect description of what late-stage dementia looks like from the inside. The feelings persist. The context dissolves. You love someone. You do not know who they are. You reach for them, and your hands find them, and you hold on, and the warmth is real, but the name is wrong, and you cannot understand why the person you are holding looks so sad. Consider for a moment the scope of what Simon gave up in the time he spent with Marceline. Every use of the crown was a conscious decision to trade a piece of himself for her safety. Every time he put it on, he knew. He knew the cost. He had documented the cost in his tapes. He had watched the cost accumulate in the mirror, in the blue skin that took longer and longer to fade, in the long nose that stayed a little longer each time, in the words that came back a little more slowly after each episode. He was a researcher, and he was researching his own destruction, and his research told him clearly that the trajectory was terminal and irreversible. And he used the crown anyway. He used it to save Marceline from slime creatures and radiation and the 1,000 small catastrophes of surviving in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. And each time he paid the price willingly, because the alternative was unthinkable. The alternative was Marceline dead. The alternative was a 7-year-old girl devoured by monsters, while a man with a crown in his pack did nothing because he was afraid of what wearing it would do to him. Simon was many things, but he was never that kind of coward. His cowardice, if you can call it that, ran in the other direction. He was afraid to stop. He was afraid to not protect her. He was afraid that his sanity was less important than her survival. And he was right, and being right about that is perhaps the most tragic form of rightness the show ever presents. There is a specific cruelty in the way the Crown deteriorates Simon that mirrors the way certain forms of cognitive decline actually progress. It does not take everything at once. It takes things strategically, one at a time, in an order that maximizes awareness of the loss. You do not wake up one morning as a completely different person. You wake up one morning and cannot find a word, a single word that you used yesterday without thinking about it. You know the concept. You know the shape of what you want to say, but the word itself, the phonetic container that holds the meaning, is gone. And you notice its absence with a clarity that is itself a form of torture. Because noticing requires the same cognitive machinery that the disease is in the process of dismantling. You are using your mind to observe the destruction of your mind. You are the instrument and the thing being measured, and the measurements keep getting worse. Simon eventually made a decision that cost him everything he had left. He left Marceline, not because he stopped loving her, because he was afraid of what he was becoming, and he was afraid that the thing he was becoming would hurt her. He could feel the Crown's influence growing stronger with each use, could feel the boundaries of his self growing thinner, could feel the intrusions becoming more frequent and more sustained. He was losing time, hours he could not account for, words he could not remember saying. He was becoming unpredictable, and unpredictability around a child is not just dangerous, it is unconscionable. He knew this. The part of him that was still Simon, the part that was still a responsible adult who understood what it meant to care for someone small and vulnerable, knew that the kindest thing he could do for Marceline was to leave before he became someone who could harm her without even knowing he was doing it. He wrote her a letter, a note on the back of a photograph of the two of them together. In the note, he apologized. He apologized for whatever he might do when he could no longer remember who he was. He apologized for the person he was becoming, for the cold, strange creature that the Crown was building out of the ruins of his personality. He asked her to forgive him. He told her, in the clearest language his deteriorating mind could still produce, that the thing he was becoming was not him, that the things it would say and do were not his choices, that somewhere beneath the ice and the confusion and the wrong names, he was still there, or at least he hoped he was, or at least he wanted to believe he could be. The note is the emotional center of I Remember You. It is written in Simon's hand, in Simon's voice, with Simon's clarity, and it is the last fully coherent thing Simon ever produced before the Crown completed its work. It is, in every way that matters, his final testament, his last will, his proof of existence. After this note, there is no more Simon. There is only the Ice King wearing Simon's body like an ill-fitting suit, occupying Simon's possessions, handling Simon's possessions, and understanding none of it. In the episode, the Ice King finds this note among his belongings. He does not recognize the handwriting. He does not remember writing it. He reads the words and thinks they are song lyrics, catchy phrases that someone scribbled down for a tune that was never finished. He brings them to Marceline and asks her to help him write a song. He is excited. He thinks he has found something great. A ready-made set of lyrics that just need a melody. He does not understand why she looks at the note and starts to cry. He does not understand why she keeps looking at him with that expression, that mixture of grief and fury and helpless, desperate love that is too large for her face, too heavy for her body, too old for her years. He does not understand because he cannot understand. The man who wrote that note is gone. The Ice King is someone else, wearing Simon's body, living in Simon's castle, holding Simon's possessions and understanding none of it. He thinks Marceline is being dramatic. He thinks she is overreacting to a perfectly good set of lyrics. He does not know that the lyrics are a suicide note from a dead man who is still walking around. Rebecca Sugar storyboarded that episode with Cole Sanchez, and she wrote the music. Sugar composed all 4 songs in the episode and wrote the lyrics, with Sanchez co-writing the lyrics for one of them. For the demo of Remember You, Sugar recorded vocals over a separate track of her playing an omnichord, and that omnichord playing was eventually worked directly into the finished episode, its warbling, melancholic tone becoming inseparable from the emotional texture of the scene. The song they sing together, Remember You, is structured as a duet where both singers are reaching for the same memory from opposite sides of an unbridgeable gap. Marceline sings about the man she knew, about the loss that has defined her life for centuries, about the father who chose to leave rather than risk hurting her, about the face behind the face of the stranger sitting next to her. The Ice King sings about lyrics he thinks are clever. They harmonize, their voices almost in sync, And that slight disconnect between the two voices is the entire tragedy compressed into sound. They are singing the same song and hearing completely different things. She hears a goodbye that was never spoken aloud. He hears a hook that needs a bridge. 2.535 million people watched that episode when it aired on October 15, 2012. It received universal acclaim. Oliver Sava of the AV Club called it one of the most touching stories the series had ever told, and said it hit like a sledgehammer. Charlie Jane Anders of IO9 called it one of the most intense things she had seen in ages. Rebecca Sugar's involvement in the episode was a crucial factor in its emotional impact, and Sugar would go on to create Steven Universe the following year, another show deeply invested in themes of love, loss, and identity. But the reason I Remember You endures, the reason it is almost always cited as the single greatest episode of Adventure Time, is not because it is sad. Sadness is easy. Any show can make you sad. A dead pet, a farewell, a hospital bed. The machinery of sadness is well understood and easily operated. What I Remember You does is harder. It is specifically sad. It does not deal in generalities. It does not gesture vaguely at loss. It shows you the exact mechanics of a particular kind of loss, the kind where the person you love is standing right in front of you and cannot see you, the kind where the body is present and the person is absent, the kind where your grief has no legitimate target, because the thing you are grieving has not officially ended. The person is right there. They are breathing and talking and singing and smiling. They are right there, and they are gone. And this is the part that the show explores with extraordinary patience and depth across its remaining seasons, never rushing, never simplifying. Never pretending that the emotional terrain of this particular kind of loss can be mapped in a single episode or resolved with a single revelation. What does it mean to love someone who does not know you? What does it mean to carry a relationship that only exists in your memory and not in theirs? What does it mean to visit the Ice King, to see him wearing Simon's glasses, his actual glasses, still sitting on his face like a relic from another era? To hear echoes of Simon's vocabulary in his rambling, to catch occasional flashes of Simon's gentleness in the way the Ice King handles Gunter the Penguin, to know that somewhere inside this ridiculous, pitiable old man, there is a trace of the person who saved your life 1,000 years ago, and to know equally well that you will never reach that trace, that it is buried too deep, that the crown is won, that the battle is over, and that the only thing you can do is sit with the stranger who replaced the person you loved and pretend that it is enough. Marceline does this. For centuries, Marceline does this. She is immortal, remember? She is a vampire, she does not age, she does not die. She carries her grief across centuries the way you carry a stone in your pocket, always present, always heavy, always there when you reach for it. She visits the Ice King. She tolerates his nonsense. She lets him into her life in small, careful doses, maintaining a relationship that is, from her perspective, a constant, low-grade form of heartbreak. She does not explain to him who he used to be, because she has learned, through bitter experience, through conversations that went nowhere, through moments of false hope that collapsed into renewed despair, that it does not help. He cannot retain it. Telling him creates a momentary flash of confusion and pain that disappears as quickly as it came, leaving no trace. No lasting impact, just the brief flicker of something that might have been recognition followed by the familiar emptiness of the Ice King's incomprehension. She carries the memory of Simon alone, the way children of Alzheimer's patients carry the memory of their parents alone, holding on to a version of a person that no one else can see, that no one else remembers. That exists now only in the fragile architecture of one other mind. And this is one of the most psychologically precise things the show does with Marceline's character. Her grief has no outlet. There is no funeral for Simon Petrikov, there is no ceremony, there is no official moment where the loss is acknowledged and the community gathers and the grief is given social permission to exist. Simon is not dead. He is right there. He is walking around and talking and breathing. He is, by every biological metric, alive and well. The Ice King is not sick in any way that the other characters in the show can see. He is weird, he is annoying. He is occasionally dangerous, but he is not to anyone except Marceline a tragedy. Only Marceline knows what has been lost. Only Marceline can compare the person standing in front of her to the person who used to stand in front of her and measure the distance between them. Everyone else sees the Ice King and takes him at face value. Marceline sees the Ice King and sees a grave that walks and talks and will not stop asking her to help him write songs. This is a particular form of grief that is sometimes called ambiguous loss, a term coined by psychologist Pauline Boss. It describes the experience of losing someone who is still physically present. The person is there, but they are not there. They are alive, but the person you knew is gone. And the grief that results from this kind of loss is particularly cruel because it has no resolution. No endpoint, no moment where you can say, it is done, the loss is complete, now I can begin to heal. The loss just continues day after day, visit after visit, year after year, century after century, in Marceline's case. A wound that never closes because the thing that caused it never stops happening. The Ice King is a perpetual act of losing Simon. He is the loss in progress, the loss in the present tense, the loss that you have to watch happen in real time every single time you see him. There is something else that deserves attention here, something the show handles with remarkable subtlety across dozens of episodes spanning multiple seasons. The Ice King is not simply a blank. He is not an empty vessel. He is not a zombie or a shell or a husk. He is a person with his own personality, his own desires, his own peculiar form of loneliness, his own capacity for joy and sorrow and frustration and affection. He kidnaps princesses because he wants companionship. He makes terrible fan fiction because he wants to create. He talks to his penguins because he wants to be heard. He is, in his own broken way, trying to build a life, trying to construct meaning out of the fragments available to him, trying to connect with other beings in a world where his attempts at connection are constantly rejected because they are, understandably, unwanted and inappropriate. And Marceline has to navigate the impossible emotional terrain of relating to this person who is not Simon, who will never be Simon, but who is also not Simon's raw materials. He is Simon's loneliness without Simon's self-awareness. He is Simon's desire for connection without Simon's ability to form real connections. He is Simon's love for Betty, refracted through the crown's broken lens into an obsessive fixation on princesses. He is Simon's intellectual curiosity, reduced to a childlike fascination with penguins and magic and his own self-invented mythology. He is, if you want to be precise about it, the disease itself given a personality and a voice and a pair of sad, confused, perpetually bewildered eyes. This is something that families dealing with dementia know intimately. The person who emerges from the disease is not the person you knew, but they are not a complete stranger either. There are moments, flickering and brief and devastating in their specificity, when the old person surfaces. A gesture that recalls a lifetime of gestures, a phrase that belongs to the vocabulary of someone who no longer exists. A look, brief and startled, that seems to see you, really see you, for the first time in months or years, before the fog rolls back in and the stranger returns. And those moments are simultaneously the most precious and the most painful things in the world, because they remind you of what has been taken, and they vanish before you can hold on to them. And you are never sure whether they were real or whether you imagined them, whether you saw recognition in those eyes or whether you projected it there because you needed it so badly. Adventure Time captures this with devastating accuracy, and it does so within a show that also features a talking dog who can stretch to any shape, a bubblegum princess who is a literal piece of candy, and an entire episode about a horse that is also a detective. The tonal range of this show is unlike anything else in the history of animation. It moves from absurdist comedy to genuine philosophical inquiry within the space of a single scene, and it never feels dishonest about either register. The silly episodes are genuinely silly, committed fully to their absurdity, never winking at the audience, never hedging. The devastating episodes are genuinely devastating, committed fully to their grief, never softening the blow, never offering easy comfort. And the fact that they coexist within the same universe, within the same narrative, is itself a kind of argument about the nature of life. Things are funny and tragic at the same time. People are ridiculous and profound simultaneously. The person who makes you laugh is the same person who makes you cry. And both reactions are true, and neither one cancels the other. But the story of Simon Petrikov does not end with the Ice King. That would be too simple, too neat, too symmetrical. Adventure Time is never that kind. It gives you the tragedy, and then it gives you something that looks like hope, and then it shows you that hope can be its own form of cruelty, its own kind of cage, its own particular variety of suffering. Before we get to what happens next, it is worth noting something about the way Adventure Time distributed Simon's story across its seasons. The show did not tell this story all at once. It did not dedicate an arc or a miniseries or a concentrated block of episodes to the tragedy of Simon Petrikov. Instead, it scattered the pieces across the entire run of the show, hiding them in episodes that seemed, on their surface, to be about something else entirely. Holly Jolly Secrets looked like a Christmas special. I Remember You looked like a musical episode. Simon and Marcy looked like a flashback adventure. Evergreen looked like a bizarre prehistoric one-off. Each piece was self-contained, enjoyable on its own terms, watchable without any of the others. But together, assembled in sequence, viewed with the full context that only careful attention and rewatching could provide, they formed something much larger, a portrait that no single episode could contain, a story that required the full sprawl of the show's 10-season run to tell properly. This is not an accident. This is a deliberate narrative strategy, and it mirrors the way we actually learn about the people we love who are suffering from cognitive decline. You do not get the full story at once. You get pieces, a fragment here, a revelation there, a detail that suddenly recontextualizes something you saw months or years ago. The truth about the person emerges slowly over time through accumulated observation and gradual disclosure. And by the time you have the full picture, the person in the picture has changed again, and the picture is already out of date. Adventure Time's fragmented approach to Simon's backstory is not just clever storytelling, it is empathetic storytelling. It puts the audience in the position of Marceline, assembling the truth about a person from scattered clues and incomplete evidence, building understanding one piece at a time, always aware that there are gaps, always aware that the picture is never quite complete. And this approach had practical consequences for the way audiences engaged with the show. There are fans who have mapped Simon's entire timeline, who have assembled every piece of evidence from every episode into a coherent chronology, who have debated the precise sequence of events between the crown's acquisition and the complete transformation into the Ice King. These fans are doing exactly what Simon himself did in his tapes. They are documenting, they are trying to preserve a coherent narrative out of fragments and disorder. They are fighting against the confusion, against the entropy, against the tendency of complex stories to dissolve into noise. They are, in their own small way, remembering Simon on his behalf. In Season 5, Episode 48, an episode simply titled Betty, which aired on February 24, 2014, a magic spell in Wizard City goes wrong and accidentally strips the crown of its power, disrupting the magic that sustains the crown's curse. Without the crown's magic sustaining him, the Ice King reverts to Simon Petrikov. For a few minutes, for a few devastating, impossible minutes, Simon is back. He is himself. He has his memories, his clarity, his intelligence, his grief. He is a man who has been asleep for 1,000 years and has just woken up to find that everything he loved is gone. The world is different. The species is different. The woman he loved is 1,000 years in the past. And he is dying, because the crown's magic was also the thing keeping him alive, and without it, 1,000 years of suppressed mortality catch up to him instantly. All at once, an avalanche of time that his body was never meant to survive. He has minutes, perhaps hours, and in those minutes, in the first and possibly last moments of clarity he has experienced in a millennium, he does not think about himself. He does not think about his own survival. He thinks about Betty. He opens a portal to the past, to the moment just before she left him, because he wants to say goodbye. He wants to tell her he is sorry. He wants, in his final moments of lucidity, to close the loop, to speak the words the crown took from him before he could say them, to tell the woman he loved that he understood why she left and that he did not blame her and that the man she knew was, for this brief window, back, and that he was sorry, so sorry, for everything the crown did with his body and his voice and his face while he was gone. Betty does not say goodbye. Betty jumps through the portal. She leaves her own time, her own life, her own century, everything she has ever known, and she hurls herself 1,000 years into the future to be with Simon. In a single, irreversible act, she abandons her entire existence for the chance to save the man she loves. Think about what that means. Think about the kind of love that produces that decision. Not the careful, measured love of considered sacrifice, of weighing options and choosing the noble one. The instantaneous love. The love that does not think. The love that sees a portal closing and does not calculate the odds or consider the consequences or wonder whether the future will be kind. The love that jumps because the alternative to jumping, the alternative of standing on the other side and watching the portal close and knowing that Simon is on the other side dying and you did nothing, is simply not survivable. Betty's jump is not a decision, it is a reflex. It is love functioning at the level of instinct, below conscious thought, below rationality, below the part of the brain that knows you should be careful. And for a moment, for one shining, impossible moment, they are together again. Simon and Betty. The scholar and his fiancée. The antiquarian and the woman he loved before the crown, before the war, before the world ended, before everything that happened after everything that happened. Two people who loved each other, standing in the same room, looking at each other with full recognition, knowing each other's names, seeing each other clearly for the first time in 1,000 years. And then the magic is restored. Death, the actual personification of death in Adventure Time's mythology, departs, apologizing to Simon as he goes. The crown's power returns, and Simon disappears. The Ice King comes back blinking, confused, with no memory of what just happened. Betty is stranded 1,000 years in the future, in a world she does not recognize, surrounded by beings she does not understand, with a man who does not know her. She gave up everything to save him, and she arrived just in time to watch him vanish. She made it across 1,000 years of history, and she was too late by minutes. This is the pattern of Simon's story, and it is the pattern that gives it its unbearable weight. Hope followed by loss. Clarity followed by erasure. The show presents these cycles not as dramatic twists, but as the natural rhythm of the disease, the way degenerative conditions actually work in the lives of the people who endure them. There are good days and bad days. There are moments of lucidity that feel like miracles, that trick you into thinking, maybe this time, maybe the person you love is coming back, followed by returns to confusion that feel like small deaths, that feel like losing the person all over again, that feel like the grief is new even though it is ancient, and the loss is fresh even though it happened 1,000 years ago. And the people who love the patient ride these cycles endlessly, their hopes rising and falling with each oscillation, never able to fully grieve because the person is not dead, never able to fully hope because the person is not well. Trapped in a liminal space where loss and presence coexist without resolution, where the only constant is the oscillation itself, the endless rocking between possibility and despair. Betty, stranded in the future, does what anyone would do in her position, what anyone driven by love and grief and the refusal to accept the unacceptable would do. She tries to fix it. She dedicates herself entirely to finding a cure for the crown's curse, to restoring Simon permanently, to undoing what was done. Her research takes her to dark places. She makes alliances with dangerous entities. She apprentices herself to forces she does not fully understand and cannot fully control. She becomes, over the course of the show's later seasons, increasingly desperate, increasingly willing to sacrifice her own well-being, her own sanity, her own moral clarity, for the chance to bring Simon back. The show watches this transformation with unflinching honesty, and it treats her desperation not as noble sacrifice, but as its own kind of sickness, its own form of obsessive attachment, a mirror image of the crown's curse that consumes her from the inside out, just as surely as the crown consumed Simon. This is one of the most nuanced things Adventure Time ever did with Simon's story. It showed that the tragedy does not just happen to the patient. It radiates outward, like heat from a fire or cracks from a point of impact, touching everyone in proximity, reshaping everyone it reaches. Betty's obsession with curing Simon is understandable, even admirable, even heartbreaking in its devotion. But it is also destructive. It isolates her. It distorts her judgment. It makes her willing to do terrible things in service of a goal that may not be achievable. It turns her into a person Simon would not recognize, which is its own kind of bitter irony. The caregiver transformed by the act of caring the way the patient is transformed by the disease. And the show never judges her for this. It understands that love, when it encounters a problem it cannot solve, when it is confronted with a loss it cannot reverse, sometimes becomes its own kind of madness. The crown took Simon's mind. The grief of losing Simon took Betty's. Both of them were consumed by the same tragedy, just from different sides. There is a conversation that happens in families dealing with long-term care, a conversation that is almost never spoken aloud but that hums beneath every interaction, every decision, every sleepless night. It is the conversation about limits, about how much of yourself you can give to someone else's recovery before there is nothing left of you to give, about the point at which devotion becomes self-destruction, about the question that no one wants to ask because asking it feels like betrayal. How long do you keep trying? How long do you hold on to the possibility that things will get better? How long do you sacrifice your own life, your own health, your own future for someone who may never come back, who may never know what you sacrificed, who may never be able to thank you or even recognize you? Betty's answer to this question is absolute. She will try forever. She will sacrifice everything. There is no limit to what she will give, no line she will not cross, no price she will not pay. And the show presents this as both the most loving thing Betty could do and the most dangerous. Because love without limits is not just love. It is obsession. It is self-erasure. It is the caregiver version of the crown's curse, consuming the person from the inside out, replacing their identity with a single, all-consuming purpose that crowds out everything else. Betty, before Simon's disappearance, was a researcher, a professor, a person with her own interests and ambitions, and a life that existed independently of the man she loved. Betty, after Simon's disappearance, is nothing but the quest to save him. She has no hobbies. She has no friends. She has no desires beyond the one desire. The crown turned Simon into a monomaniac obsessed with princesses. Grief turned Betty into a monomaniac obsessed with curing Simon. The symmetry is not accidental. The show is making a specific argument about the way catastrophic loss reshapes the people who experience it. And the argument is this: loss does not just take the person you lose, it takes you too. It takes the person you were before the loss, the person who had room in their life for more than one emotion, more than one goal, more than one reason to get up in the morning. That person is also lost, and their loss is also a tragedy, and no one is keeping tapes of it. And so you arrive at the series finale. Come along with me, September 3rd, 2018, 44 minutes. 4 parts, episodes 280 through 283. The end of 8 years of storytelling of a show that began as a silly cartoon about a boy and his stretchy dog, and evolved into one of the most emotionally ambitious works of narrative art produced in any medium in the 21st century. The land of Oo faces an existential threat from Golb, a cosmic entity of chaos and discord, a being so ancient and so powerful that it predates the show's entire mythology. Golb is entropy given form, decay given purpose, the force that unmakes everything that has been made. You can think of Golb as the universe's acknowledgement that everything ends, that every structure decays, that every identity dissolves, that the crown's work, the work of erasure and transformation and the slow dissolution of the self, is not an anomaly but a specific instance of a universal process. Everything becomes something else. Everything loses its original form. GOLB is the name Adventure Time gives to that process. And the name is important because naming a thing gives you a way to confront it, even if confrontation is ultimately futile. Golb is summoned through a chain of events set in motion by a final war. A last conflict that brings all the show's threads to a single point. And what matters for this story, for Simon's story, is what happens inside Golb when the entity consumes several of the show's characters, including the Ice King, Betty, and Finn. Inside Golb, something remarkable happens. The entity's nature, its method of processing the things it consumes, is to reduce them to their essential components, to strip away everything that is not fundamental, everything that has been added or imposed or acquired. It is, in a sense, the opposite of the crown. Where the crown adds layers of false identity, Golb removes them. Where the crown buries the true self under accumulated distortion, Golb strips the distortion away. And for the Ice King, that means the crown's influence is removed. Inside Golb, the Ice King becomes Simon Petrikov again. Fully, completely, with all his memories and all his clarity and all his pain. And Betty is there. She is there because she has followed Simon to the end of the world and into the belly of a god, because that is what Betty does. Because Betty has spent the last several years of her existence pursuing exactly this moment. The moment when Simon would return, the moment when she could look at him and see him looking back. And he does. He sees her. He knows her name. He knows his own name. They are together inside the belly of a god, and for the second time in the series, Simon is himself and Betty is with him. And the world is ending around them. Simon escapes. Betty does not. Betty chooses not to. In the final moment, knowing that Golb cannot be defeated by conventional means, knowing that the entity will destroy everything if it is not stopped, Betty puts on the crown. The same crown that destroyed Simon. The crown that she has spent years studying and trying to neutralize. She puts it on and she makes a wish. She tries to wish Golb out of existence. She tries to use the crown's wish-granting power. The same power that turned Gunter into a copy of Evergreen. The same power that turned Simon into the Ice King, to erase the cosmic threat that stands before her. But the crown grants your deepest wish, not the wish you speak out loud, not the wish you think you want, the wish you feel, the wish that sits at the very bottom of your consciousness, beneath the layers of rationality and strategy and conscious thought. And Betty's deepest wish is not to destroy Golb. Betty's deepest wish is to protect Simon, at all costs. No matter what. The wish that has driven every decision she has made since she jumped through that portal. The wish that has consumed her life and distorted her judgment and brought her to this exact moment, this exact place, inside the belly of a cosmic entity at the end of the world. The crown takes her wish and enacts it in the only way it can. Betty merges with Golb. She becomes part of the entity, fused into its being, sacrificing her individual existence to neutralize the threat to Simon and to all of Oo. She becomes Golb Betty, a new being, neither Betty nor Golby, but something in between, something unrecognizable, something that is no longer a person in any sense that the word person can accommodate. And she leaves through a portal, and she does not come back. Simon watches this happen. Simon, who spent 1,000 years as a puppet of the crown, who lost his mind and his identity and his love and his life, and then got them all back, and then lost them again, watches the woman who gave up everything for him give up the last thing she had left, herself, her existence, her identity. He screams her name. He reaches for her. He is comforted by Marceline, the girl he saved 1,000 years ago, now an adult, now the one doing the comforting, the roles reversed across a millennium. Betty is gone. And here's the thing about the crown's wish-granting mechanism that makes this scene so devastating in retrospect. The crown grants your deepest wish. Gunter's deepest wish was to be like Evergreen. Betty's deepest wish was to protect Simon. And what was Simon's deepest wish during all those centuries of wearing the crown? The show never states it directly, but the evidence is everywhere, written into every action the Ice King takes. Every kidnapping, every desperate attempt at friendship, every poorly written fanfiction about companions and adventure partners and friends. Simon's deepest wish was to not be alone. That is why the Ice King kidnaps princesses. That is why he calls everyone Gunter, reaching for connection even as the crown erases his ability to form it. That is why he follows Finn and Jake around, hoping to be included, why he shows up at parties uninvited, why he forces his terrible company on everyone around him, with a persistence that is equal parts annoying and heartbreaking. The crown took Simon's deepest wish, his desperate, fundamental, completely human need for companionship and connection and belonging, and turned it into a grotesque compulsion, a parody of connection that drove everyone away from him instead of drawing them close. 3 wishes across 65 million years, a neglected dinosaur who wanted to be loved by his master, a lonely scholar who wanted to not be alone, a desperate woman who wanted to protect the man she loved. All 3 wishes granted, all 3 wishes ruined, all 3 wishes fulfilled in the worst possible way, through the worst possible mechanism, with the worst possible consequences. The crown is not evil, it is worse than evil. It is indifferent. It is a machine. It does exactly what it is designed to do, with perfect efficiency and zero compassion. And the results are catastrophic every single time, not because the crown intends harm, but because it does not intend anything. It has no intentions. It has only a function, and its function is to grant wishes. And it turns out that granting wishes, really granting them, granting the deepest ones, the ones you do not even know you have, is one of the most destructive things that can happen to a person. There is something about the symmetry of Betty's sacrifice that the show allows to resonate without ever making it explicit. Betty wore the crown to save Simon. Simon wore the crown, originally, just for a laugh, and then later, repeatedly, to save Marceline. The crown has now consumed 2 people who loved each other in 2 different ways, for 2 different reasons, across 1,000 years of history. It is as though the crown exists to demonstrate that love, in the presence of sufficient power and insufficient wisdom, is always consumed. The crown is a machine that runs on love. It takes the deepest feelings of its wearer and uses them as fuel for its own perpetuation, converting devotion into destruction with the blind efficiency of a furnace converting wood into heat. Betty and Simon both loved fiercely, protectively, in ways that placed the well-being of another person above their own survival. And the crown turned both of their loves against them. It used Simon's love for Marceline to erase Simon. It used Betty's love for Simon to erase Betty. The crown does not hate love. It does not understand love. It simply metabolizes it the way fire metabolizes oxygen, the way entropy metabolizes order. You feed love into the crown and loss comes out. That is the exchange. That is the only exchange the crown knows how to make. And what makes this particularly devastating is the realization that the crown's original tragedy, the tragedy of Gunter the dinosaur, was also a tragedy of love. Gunter loved Evergreen. That was his deepest wish. Not power, not survival, not wisdom, just to be like the person he loved most. And the crown took that love and turned it into a template for suffering that would persist for 65 million years, consuming every mind it touched, converting every subsequent act of love into another iteration of the same ancient wound. The crown is, in the end, a monument to the destructive potential of unreciprocated love. Gunter loved Evergreen, and Evergreen did not love Gunter back, not in the way Gunter needed, and that failure of reciprocation became the crown's defining characteristic, the lens through which it interprets all subsequent relationships. Every person who wears the crown is, in some sense, reliving Gunter's heartbreak. Every person who loves someone who wears the crown is, in some sense, reliving Evergreen's failure to love Gunter back. The cycle just keeps repeating across geological timescales with different names and different faces, but the same essential dynamic. Someone loves, someone is not loved back. The crown endures. After the finale, Simon is free. The crown is depowered. He is human again, fully and permanently. He has his mind back, his memories, his name, his face, his voice, his capacity for coherent thought and sustained emotion. He has, for the first time in 1,000 years, the ability to simply exist as himself, without the constant threat of erasure, without the crown whispering in the back of his skull, without the slow dissolution of everything that makes him who he is. And this is where the story might end, in a lesser show. The curse is broken, the patient recovers, The long nightmare is over. Cue the emotional music. Roll the credits. Let the audience go home feeling satisfied that the good man got his good ending, that suffering has a statute of limitations, that enough endurance eventually produces reward. But Adventure Time is not a lesser show. It has never been a lesser show. And in 2023, 5 years after the original series ended, Adventure Time Fiona and Cake premiered on Max on August 31, a 10-episode limited series that continued the story of the Adventure Time universe. And it asked a question that most stories about recovery are too cowardly to ask. A question that most feel-good narratives actively avoid. What happens after the cure? What happens when the disease is gone and the person is still there, alive and conscious and burdened with the full unmediated weight of everything they have been through? What happens when you get your mind back and discover that having a mind means being able to comprehend, fully and without the mercy of confusion, exactly how much you have lost? Simon Petrikov in Fiona and Cake is not okay. He is free, and he is not okay. He lives in the land of U, a world that is not his world, surrounded by beings that are not his species, in a time that is not his time. He is the last human in a world of magical creatures, a man from the 20th century living in a post-apocalyptic fantasy realm, a scholar without a university, an antiquarian without a civilization to study. He is, as he describes himself, a fish out of temporal water. When he was the Ice King, he was too insane to notice how out of place he was. The madness was, in its own horrible way, a form of protection, a cocoon of incomprehension that shielded him from the reality of his situation. Now, without that shield, without the crown's merciful fog of confusion, the reality is overwhelming. And it is this. He is alone. He is out of time. The woman he loved is fused with a cosmic entity somewhere beyond the reach of any mortal endeavor. The world he knew is gone. The species he belonged to is extinct. The life he had before the crown is not just over, it is erased, it is unrecoverable, it exists only in his memory. And his memory, after 1,000 years of crown-induced distortion, is not entirely reliable. He is depressed, genuinely, profoundly, clinically depressed. He sits in a small apartment in the land of U, surrounded by artifacts from a civilization that no longer exists. Relics of the human world that he keeps the way you keep photographs of the dead, as proof that something was real, that something mattered, that the void was not always there. He goes through the motions of daily life without conviction or purpose. He attends therapy. He tries to engage with the world around him. But the effort feels hollow, and he knows it is hollow, and the knowledge of its hollowness makes it more hollow still. He notes, with devastating self-awareness, with the precise and terrible clarity of a man whose intelligence has been restored to him just in time for him to understand the full scope of his loss, that he sometimes misses being the Ice King. Because at least the Ice King was too crazy to understand how different his life had become. At least the Ice King was protected by the very thing that destroyed him. At least the Ice King, in his insanity, had a kind of contentment that Simon, in his sanity, cannot achieve. This is the kind of observation that stops you cold. A man who was tortured by a magical artifact for 1,000 years, who lost his mind and his identity and everyone he loved, admitting that he misses the torture. Because the torture at least came with the mercy of not knowing what he had lost. Because clarity, it turns out, is its own form of suffering. Because seeing things as they are is not always better than not seeing them at all. The second episode of Fiona and Cake, also titled Simon Petrikov, shows the depth of his despair with unflinching honesty. He has built a shrine to Golb in his closet. A literal shrine hidden away from the world, assembled from artifacts associated with Betty's magical research. The farm world and Curidian. The flying carpet she used, the one Simon had stolen from a character named Ash, and that Betty had subsequently claimed for her rituals. The crocodile clips from her experiments, 2 small effigies of Golb. He is attempting to summon the entity, to reach Betty within it, to find some way across the impossible distance between himself and the woman who sacrificed herself for him. He uses the power of a character called Evil Choose Goose to attempt the ritual, and the show frames this attempt with unmistakable care and unmistakable darkness, making it clear that what Simon is doing is not heroic or romantic or noble. It is the action of a man who has run out of reasons to keep going. His shrine is not a plan. It is a prayer. It is the last resort of someone who has exhausted every other option for finding meaning in a world that no longer makes sense to him. It is, depending on how you read it, an act of desperation or an act of surrender. And when the ritual seems to fail, when the summoning produces nothing, when the closet remains a closet and Golb remains unreachable, and Betty remains fused with a cosmic entity somewhere beyond the limits of mortal comprehension, something unexpected happens. A portal opens in the back of Simon's mind, and out tumbles a confused, talking cat. This is Cake, from the Fiona and Cake universe that existed inside the Ice King's imagination, and that has persisted somehow inside Simon's consciousness even after the crown was removed. And the arrival of this impossible cat sets in motion the events of the entire 10-episode series, dragging Simon out of his depression and into an adventure he neither sought nor wanted. An adventure that will eventually force him to confront the question that his depression has been circling around since the day the crown was depowered. Can you build a life worth living out of the wreckage of a life that was destroyed? Can you find meaning in a world that is not yours, among people who are not your people, in a time that is not your time? Can the act of living itself, stripped of everything that used to make it meaningful, stripped of love and purpose and belonging and context, be enough? Can it be its own justification? These are not questions that most animated shows ask. These are not questions that most any show asks, with this level of honesty and this depth of engagement. They are questions that people in the real world struggle with every day. People recovering from illness, from addiction, from trauma, from loss, people who have come through the fire and found that the world on the other side of the fire is not the world they remember. People who have survived and are now confronting the unexpected difficulty of living in the aftermath of survival. The shows that do ask these questions tend to be serious, prestige dramas aimed at adults. Shows that announce their seriousness through muted color palettes and long silences and characters who stare meaningfully out of rain-streaked windows. Fiona and Cake asks these questions while also being a show about a cat who can stretch like taffy and a human girl navigating a parallel universe. It asks them with the same matter-of-fact confidence that Adventure Time always brought to its most serious themes, the confidence that says, we do not need to stop being funny to be profound. We do not need to change our visual language or our narrative style to say something real about human suffering. We can be exactly what we are and still break your heart. The show also does something remarkable with the relationship between Simon and Fiona. Fiona is, in a sense, a creation of the crown. She exists because the Ice King imagined her, because the crown's distortion of Simon's mind produced, alongside all the confusion and the wrong names and the kidnapped princesses, a universe of stories, a universe populated by characters who are reflections and refractions of the people in Simon's real life. Fiona is Finn, gender-swapped, reimagined, filtered through the Ice King's broken lens. And yet she is also her own person, with her own desires and her own agency and her own story to tell. She is proof that even a broken mind can create something beautiful. That even the Ice King in the depths of his crown-induced psychosis was capable of imagination, of creativity, of bringing something into existence that had value and meaning and life. The crown destroyed Simon's ability to connect with real people, but it did not destroy his ability to create. It could not destroy that. It could only redirect it, channel it into the only outlet available to a mind that had been stripped of everything else. This is what recovery from a catastrophic illness often looks like, and it is almost never depicted in fiction, almost never explored with the honesty it deserves. The disease ends, and everyone expects you to be grateful, to be relieved, to snap back to the person you were before, to pick up the pieces and assemble them into the shape of a life, and get on with the business of living. But the pieces do not fit together the way they used to. Some of them are missing. Some of them belong to a different puzzle. The person who recovers is not the person who got sick. They have been changed by the experience, shaped by it, scarred by it, in ways that are not visible but are no less real, no less permanent, no less defining. And the world they return to is not the world they left. The relationships have shifted. The context has changed. The people who waited for them have aged, or moved on, or died, or become different people themselves. The life they had before the illness is gone, not just paused, but gone. And the life they have after the illness is something they have to build from scratch, with no blueprint and no guarantee and no assurance that the building will be worth the effort. Simon's depression in Fiona and Cake is the show's most mature storytelling, its most honest, and its most difficult. And it is made possible by the extraordinary work of Tom Kenny, who has voiced both Simon Petrikov and the Ice King across every season of Adventure Time, all 10 seasons and the Distant Lands specials, and Fiona and Cake. Kenny brings a quality of quiet devastation to the restored Simon that is unlike anything else in contemporary animation. The Ice King was loud and manic and absurd, a whirlwind of misplaced energy and confused desires, voiced with a nasally, high-pitched delivery that communicated both comedy and pathos simultaneously. Simon restored is the opposite. He is quiet and precise and hollow. His voice is measured and his words are careful, and there is an emptiness behind them, a vacancy, a sense that the person speaking is going through the motions of communication without being fully present in the act. Kenny plays the same character at two different points on the spectrum of human suffering: the manic confusion of the disease and the quiet desolation of the recovery. And both performances are extraordinary, and the contrast between them is the entire argument of the show made audible. You can hear the Crown's absence in Simon's voice. You can hear the silence where the madness used to be. And there is a detail in Fiona and Cake that you might miss if you are not paying close attention, but that once you see it, you cannot unsee. Simon, restored to his full faculties, still has moments where the Ice King's behavioral patterns surface. Small things, a turn of phrase, an impulse he catches before it fully forms. The way he might reach for a crown that is no longer on his head, a phantom gesture, like an amputee reaching for a missing limb. The Ice King was not just a costume Simon wore for 1,000 years. The Ice King was, in some sense, a second life, a second set of habits and memories and emotional responses. And that second life does not simply vanish when the crown is removed. It leaves traces, echoes, grooves worn into the neural pathways of a brain that spent 10 centuries operating in a completely different mode. Simon is not the Ice King anymore, but he is not entirely not the Ice King either. And the work of separating the two, of figuring out which impulses are his and which are the crown's residual programming, is itself a kind of ongoing labor, a daily project of self-reclamation that has no clear endpoint. This mirrors something that researchers who study recovery from long-term cognitive impairment have observed. The restoration of function is not the same as the erasure of the condition's effects. The brain, even when healed, carries the marks of what it went through. Pathways that were rerouted during the illness do not always reroute back. Habits formed during periods of confusion persist into periods of clarity. The person who recovers is not the person who got sick, and they are also not the person they would have been if they had never gotten sick. They are a third thing, a hybrid, a palimpsest of cells written over one another, none fully legible, all partially present. And Simon, with his researcher's mind restored, is painfully aware of this. He can feel the layers, he can sense the palimpsest. He knows that his thoughts are not purely his own, that some of them belong to 1,000 years of the Ice King's fractured consciousness, and the work of sorting them, of determining which thoughts to trust and which to discard, which impulses to follow and which to recognize as remnants of a disease he no longer has, is exhausting in a way that no one around him fully understands. Because from the outside, he looks fine. He looks cured. He looks like Simon Petrikov, the man on the tapes, the man with the glasses, the man who was always supposed to be there underneath the ice. From the outside, the story has a happy ending. From the inside, the story is still happening, and it may never stop happening. And the happy ending is actually just the beginning of a different, quieter, more private struggle that does not have a name and does not have a mythology and does not have an audience watching it unfold and calling it brave. There is a thread that runs through all of this, from Evergreen's lab 65 million years ago to Simon's closet shrine in the present day, from the mushroom war to Fiona and Cake, from the first tape to the last episode. And it is this: the crown is not the villain of Simon's story. Loss is the villain. The crown is simply the mechanism by which loss is delivered, the particular vehicle through which a universal experience is made specific and visible and narratively tractable. Without the crown, Simon would still be mortal. He would still age, he would still eventually lose his memories and his faculties and his connection to the people he loves. He would still experience the slow erosion of self that all humans experience as they move through time. The gradual fading of sharpness, the increasing distance between the person you are and the person you were, the growing list of names and faces and places that you can no longer quite recall. The crown accelerated this process and made it spectacular and magical and visible, gave it a cause and a shape and a set of specific traceable symptoms. But the underlying reality, the reality that the crown is a metaphor for, the reality that we all lose ourselves eventually, that identity is temporary. That the people we love will one day look at us and not know who we are, or we will look at them and not know who they are. That is not magic. That is time. That is being human. That is the thing we all carry, whether we wear a crown or not. Adventure Time understood this. It understood that Simon's story is not really a fantasy, not at its core, not in the part that matters. It is a metaphor, yes, a brilliantly constructed one of the most sustained and carefully developed metaphors in the history of television animation. But it is a metaphor for something that does not need a metaphor, because it is already happening, right now, in millions of homes around the world, to millions of families who are watching someone they love disappear. The crown is Alzheimer's. The crown is dementia. The crown is Parkinson's. The crown is any degenerative condition that erodes the mind while leaving the body intact. That turns a person into a stranger while they are still standing in front of you. That forces the people who love them to grieve someone who has not died, to mourn someone who is still breathing, to carry the weight of a loss that has no official end date, because the person they have lost is still, technically, right there. And what Simon's story adds to this conversation, what it contributes that is uniquely its own, is the perspective of the patient. Most dementia narratives, most stories about cognitive decline, are told from the outside, from the perspective of the caregiver, the child, the spouse, the friend. You see the loved one deteriorating through someone else's eyes. You see the grief and the frustration and the exhaustion and the love, but you rarely see the disease from the inside. You rarely see what it looks like to be the person disappearing. Simon's story is told from both sides. You see Marceline's grief, stretched across 1,000 years of visits to a man who does not know her. You see Betty's desperation, escalating across multiple seasons into something that borders on madness. But you also see Simon's tapes, Simon's letter, Simon's futile attempts to hold on to himself, to document his own dissolution, to leave behind some record of who he was before the person he was ceased to exist. You see the disease from the inside, and what it looks like from the inside is this. You are watching yourself disappear. You know it is happening. You can feel it happening, the way you can feel the tide going out, the way you can feel the temperature dropping. You cannot stop it. You cannot slow it. You cannot bargain with it or reason with it or fight it with the tools your mind provides, because your mind is the thing being taken. And the worst part is not the forgetting. The worst part is the knowing. The worst part is the brief, lucid intervals where you can see clearly what you are losing, where the fog lifts just long enough for you to survey the damage, and you understand that the next interval will be shorter, and the one after that shorter still, until eventually there are no intervals at all, and the person you were is gone, and something else is wearing your face and living in your house and calling the people you love by the wrong name. There is a particular horror to this that the show captures with a precision that suggests someone on the writing staff had personal experience with it, had sat across a table from someone they loved and watched the light in their eyes go somewhere else. The horror is not the confusion itself. The confusion, when it comes, is in some ways a mercy. When the crown has fully taken over, when Simon is fully the Ice King, there is no suffering in the traditional sense. The Ice King does not know he is suffering. He does not know he has lost anything. He is in his own distorted way, content. He has his penguins. He has his ice castle. He has his fan fiction and his schemes and his bizarre obsessive quest for princess companionship. He is not happy. Not in any way that someone who knew Simon would recognize as happiness. But he is not in agony either. The agony belongs to the transitional period. The agony belongs to the time between the period when Simon is still partly Simon and partly the Ice King, when the two identities coexist in the same skull like two radio stations broadcasting on adjacent frequencies, each one bleeding into the other, creating static, creating noise, creating a third sound that is neither signal but that contains fragments of both. That transitional period is where the real tragedy lives. Not in the end state, not in the fully transformed Ice King, who is too far gone to grieve for what he has lost. In the middle, in the space between knowing and not knowing, in the tape where Simon can feel the name slipping away but can still remember that it was important, in the moment where he looks at Marceline and loves her and calls her the wrong name and does not know why she is crying, the middle is where families of dementia patients live. Not at the end, when the person is fully gone and the grief can finally begin to settle into something resembling acceptance, but in the middle, when the person is still partly there, still partly reachable, still capable of moments that look like recognition and feel like connection, and then dissolve into nothing, leaving you standing in the wreckage of a hope you should have known better than to feel. Simon's letter to Marceline is written in that middle. It is written by a man who can feel the intervals getting shorter, who can measure, with the trained eye of a researcher, the rate of his own decline. He writes it because he knows he will not be able to write it later. He writes it because he wants there to be proof, somewhere in someone's hands, that he existed, that he was real, that he loved her, that the thing he is becoming is not who he is. The letter is an act of defiance against the crown, and it is the most human thing in the entire show. More human than any battle or any quest or any act of conventional heroism. It is a man who knows he is dying, not physically but existentially, looking at the abyss that is about to swallow him and saying, before it does, let me put this down. Let me make a record. Let me leave a mark. Not because the mark will save me, not because the record will change anything, but because the act of making it is the act of being human. And being human is the thing that is being taken from me. And so this letter, this note, this desperate scribble on the back of a photograph is the last human thing I will ever do. And I want it to matter. And that is, ultimately, what Adventure Time argues through the story of Simon Petrikov. That love persists. Not neatly, not cleanly, not in the way you want it to. It persists through distortion and confusion and centuries of separation and the total dissolution of the mind that originally felt it. It persists through madness and death and cosmic catastrophe and the quiet, grinding despair of recovery. It persists in Marceline's visits to the Ice King, in Betty's desperate research, in Hambo the teddy bear carried for 1,000 years, in a note on the back of a photograph that the writer will never remember writing and the reader will never be able to forget. It persists because that is what love does. It outlasts the person who feels it. It outlasts the mind that holds it. It outlasts the name, the face, the voice, the specific daily texture of being alive and knowing who you are and being known in return. All of that can be taken, all of that will be taken eventually by crowns or by time or by the simple, merciless, indifferent mechanics of biology. But the love remains. Changed, yes. Diminished, perhaps. Unrecognizable, sometimes. But present. Always present. A signal buried in the noise, too faint to decode but too persistent to ignore, too stubborn to die, too fundamental to erase. The show's mythology supports this argument at every level, in every layer, across every timescale. The crown destroyed Simon's mind, but not his capacity for connection, not the basic animal pre-verbal impulse to reach for another being and hold on. The Ice King is lonely not because he is incapable of love, but because the love has been scrambled, redirected, aimed at the wrong targets through the wrong channels in the wrong ways. He kidnaps princesses because Simon loved Betty, and the crown has turned that love into a compulsion he cannot understand or control. He calls everyone Gunter because the crown's original bearer loved Evergreen, and the crown has turned that love into a word it cannot stop repeating, a mantra of longing that echoes through 65 million years of history. The love is always there. It is the one thing the crown cannot fully erase. It is the foundation that survives every demolition, the bedrock beneath the rubble, the thing you find when you dig down past the wreckage and the confusion and the wrong names and the bizarre behavior. Consider for a moment the extraordinary scope of Adventure Time's argument about love and identity, as embodied by Simon Petrikov. The show begins with love as a simple thing. Finn loves Jake. Jake loves Finn. They are brothers, they go on adventures, they fight bad guys, they eat sandwiches. Love, in the early seasons of Adventure Time, is uncomplicated and reliable and fundamentally safe. It is the foundation of the show's world, the thing that makes everything else possible, the reason the adventures are fun instead of terrifying. But as the show matures, as it grows into its own complexity, love becomes something much more dangerous, much more demanding, much more costly. Marceline's love for Simon costs her centuries of quiet anguish. Betty's love for Simon costs her everything, up to and including her own existence. Simon's love for Marceline costs him his mind. The show traces an arc from love as comfort to love as sacrifice, from love that sustains to love that consumes, and it never suggests that the consuming version is less real than the comfortable version. It is more real, if anything. It is love tested to destruction and still somehow, improbably, stubbornly enduring. And this is the argument that Simon's story makes, not through metaphor, but through lived experience, through the accumulation of specific details across hundreds of episodes. Love is not a feeling. Love is an action. Love is the thing you do when feeling is no longer possible, when the person you feel for does not recognize you, when the circumstances that made the feeling easy have been obliterated, when every rational calculation suggests that the feeling is pointless and the effort is wasted, and the person on the receiving end will never know what you did for them. Love is Marceline visiting the Ice King. Love is Betty jumping through the portal. Love is Simon putting on the crown. Love is the note on the back of the photograph. Love is Hambo. Love is staying. Love is, in the end, the only thing in Adventure Time's vast mythology that cannot be destroyed. Not by crowns, not by comets, not by cosmic entities, not by the slow, patient, relentless work of time. And when Simon is finally permanently restored in the series finale, the love is what he has left. Not the memories, which are incomplete, fractured, full of gaps and distortions from 1,000 years of crown-induced psychosis. Not the relationships, which have been warped beyond easy repair by centuries of the Ice King's behavior, by all the kidnappings and the inappropriate advances and the general atmosphere of unhinged neediness that the Ice King brought to every interaction. Not the life he had before, because that life is gone irretrievably, along with the world it existed in, along with the species it belonged to, along with the woman it centered on. What Simon has, what he carries out of the wreckage of his long ordeal, is the love. And the love is not enough to make him whole. The love is not enough to cure his depression or fill the void left by Betty's sacrifice, or make the land of Oo feel like home, or give him a reason to get out of bed in the morning. But it is enough to keep him going. It is enough to keep him looking for reasons to stay. It is enough, barely, to sustain a life. In the final episode of Fiona and Cake, which completes its 10-episode run, titled Cheers, and airing as the 10th episode of the series, the world Simon helped create, the universe of Fiona and Cake that existed inside his own mind as a remnant of the Ice King's imagination becomes real. The title of that final episode is itself a callback that closes a circle stretching back to Simon and Marcy, back to the theme song Simon sang to keep his mind intact, back to the bar where everybody knows your name. The entity Gol Betty, the fusion of Betty and Golb, responds to the events of the season by removing the Fiona and Cake universe from Simon's consciousness and giving it independent existence, turning it into something like a dandelion seed that Fiona blows into the wind, scattering control of the universe to its inhabitants, making it, in the show's mythology, canonical, real, autonomous, free. The people in it are given independent lives. The Scarab, the cosmic enforcer who threatened the universe, is defeated and punished by being forced to work for Prismo. And Simon is freed from the burden of carrying an entire universe in his head, an entire world of stories and characters and possibilities that the Ice King imagined and that Simon inherited, and that he was in some sense responsible for, all along without knowing it. There is a beautiful irony in the fact that Gol Betty, the entity that consumed Betty, is the one who frees the Fiona and Cake universe. Betty sacrificed herself to protect Simon, and in doing so, she became part of something vast and cosmic, and beyond human comprehension. But she did not stop being Betty entirely. Some fragment of Betty persists within Gol Betty, some echo of the woman who loved Simon enough to jump through a portal and merge with a god, and that fragment responds to Simon's story, to Simon's need, to the universe that his broken mind created and that now needs to be set free. Betty cannot come back to Simon. She cannot be restored to her human form. She cannot sit across from him and say his name and hold his hand and be the person she was before. But she can do this one last thing. She can free the universe that grew in the wreckage of his mind. She can give the stories that the Ice King told, the characters that the Ice King imagined, the world that the Ice King built inside his own fractured consciousness. An existence of their own, independent of Simon, independent of the crown, independent of everything that created them. It is one final act of love, performed from the other side of a transformation that should have made love impossible. And it is proof, quiet and understated and devastating, that Betty is still in there somewhere, still watching, still caring, still performing the only act that love has ever reliably performed, staying. And in the aftermath, he stands in the land of Oo, and he is still displaced, still out of time, still grieving, still bearing the weight of everything that has happened and everything that has been lost. But he is also for the first time at something approaching peace, not happiness. The show is too honest for happiness, too aware of the difference between resolution and comfort. But peace, the quiet, exhausted peace of someone who has stopped fighting and started accepting, who has looked at his life with all its impossible losses and incomprehensible twists and thousand-year detours through madness and magic, and decided that it is his, and that it is enough, and that he will live it, not because it is the life he wanted, not because it is the life he would have chosen, but because it is the life he has, and having a life, any life, after everything he has been through, is its own kind of miracle. Even if it does not feel like one, even if it feels more like an obligation than a gift. Marceline is still there. She was there when he was Simon. She was there when he was the Ice King. She was there through every use of the crown and every loss of memory, and every visit to a man who called her Gunter, and every century of carrying the knowledge of who he used to be alone. She will be there now, whatever he becomes next. Their relationship has survived the Mushroom War, and 1,000 years of separation, and the total erasure and restoration of his identity, and the death of the woman he loved, and the slow, grinding work of rebuilding a self from the ruins of a self that was demolished. If that is not proof that love persists, then the word proof has no meaning. There is a concept in philosophy called the ship of Theseus. If you replace every plank of a ship, one at a time, over the course of years, is it still the same ship when the last plank is new? And if you then rebuild the original ship from the replaced planks, which one is the real ship? Adventure Time poses this question about Simon Petrikov with extraordinary rigor and emotional depth. The Crown replaced every plank of Simon Petrikov, one memory at a time, one personality trait at a time, one relationship at a time, one name at a time, until nothing original remained and the ship was entirely new, and the new ship called itself the Ice King, and did not remember being any other ship. And then the crown was removed, and the original planks were restored. And the question became, is the restored Simon the same Simon who wore the crown in the first place? Is he the same man who found Marceline in the ruins? Is he the same man who wrote the letter? Is he the same man who put on the crown for a laugh in a Scandinavian shop 1,000 years ago? Or is he a copy, a reconstruction, a new person built from the blueprint of an old one, carrying someone else's memories, wearing someone else's grief, living someone else's incomplete and damaged life? The show's answer, delivered not through dialogue, but through the quiet accumulation of narrative detail across hundreds of episodes and multiple series, is that the question does not matter. What matters is not whether Simon is the same person. What matters is that he is a person. What matters is that he is here now, alive, conscious, capable of love and grief and wonder and despair, and that those capacities connect him to the people around him, and that those connections are real, regardless of whether the self that forms them is original or restored or something else entirely. This is a profoundly compassionate answer, and it is the answer that families of dementia patients need to hear, even if they never hear it from a cartoon about a boy and his magical dog in a world made from the wreckage of a nuclear war. It says, your loved one is still your loved one, even if they do not know your name, even if they do not recognize your face, even if the person standing in front of you is, in every measurable way, a different person from the one you remember, a person with different habits and different words and different reactions and different eyes. The connection between you is real. The love between you is real, and those things do not require a continuous, unbroken identity to exist. They do not require a perfectly preserved self to be valid. They require only presence, only proximity, only the willingness to stay in the room with someone who has become a stranger, and to keep staying, and to keep loving, and to keep remembering on behalf of someone who can no longer remember for themselves. There is another philosophical dimension to Simon's story that the show engages with, less explicitly than the ship of Theseus, but no less profoundly. And that is the question of whether suffering has value, whether the thing you go through makes you something more than you were before, or whether it simply makes you less. Whether the 1,000 years of the Ice King contributed something to Simon's restored self, some depth of understanding, some quality of empathy, some hard-won wisdom that he could not have acquired any other way. Or whether those 1,000 years were simply lost, wasted, a millennium-long interruption in the life of a man who would have been better off if none of it had ever happened. The show does not answer this question cleanly either, and that is to its credit. It would be easy and dishonest to present Simon's suffering as a kind of crucible, a forge that tempered him into something stronger and wiser and more complete. The suffering as growth narrative is one of the most persistent and most harmful stories our culture tells about trauma and illness. It says, there was a reason. It says, you are better for it. It says, the pain was worth it because look at who you became. And for some people, in some circumstances, there may be truth in that. But for many people, suffering is not a teacher. It is just suffering. It does not make you better. It does not make you wiser. It makes you hurt. And it takes time from you that you cannot get back. And the person you become in its aftermath is not necessarily an improved version of the person you were before. They are just a different version. A version that has been through something terrible. A version that carries the weight of that something in every interaction, in every decision, in the particular way they hold their body when they think no one is watching. Simon, in Fiona and Cake, does not present his 1,000 years as the Ice King as a learning experience. He does not wax philosophical about the insights he gained from losing his mind. He does not look back on the madness with the grateful detachment of someone who has come through the fire and found enlightenment on the other side. He looks back on it with horror and grief, and the specific, aching bewilderment of a person who cannot quite believe that this actually happened to him, that this is actually his life, that the 1,000 years of ice and confusion and wrong names and kidnapped princesses was not a nightmare from which he has just awoken, but his actual, factual biography. The show respects him too much to make his suffering meaningful. It allows it to be what it is, a catastrophe, a loss, a thing that happened to a good man for no reason, through no fault of his own, with no lesson attached and no silver lining visible. And yet something emerged from the wreckage that was not there before. Not wisdom, exactly, not growth, in the way that self-help culture understands growth. Something harder to name, a kind of depth, a quality of attention, a way of being in the world that comes only from having been completely outside of it, from having seen it from the other side of a shattered mind, from having been both the observer and the thing observed, both the person losing their grip and the grip itself, both Simon and the Ice King and the impossible haunted space between them. Simon restored carries a weight that other characters in the show do not carry. He knows something that they do not know. He knows what it is like to not exist. Not to be dead, which is its own kind of thing, its own well-documented territory, with its own maps and its own literature, but to not exist while still being alive. To be present and absent simultaneously. To occupy a body and a life that do not belong to you, that belong to someone the Crown invented. Someone who shares your face but none of your memories. Someone who walks through your life like a tourist through a foreign city, seeing everything and understanding nothing. Simon knows what that feels like, and that knowledge, that experiential understanding of the fragility of selfhood, of how easily everything you think of as you can be removed and replaced without anyone noticing that a substitution has occurred, gives him a perspective that is both a burden and a strange quiet gift. He knows how precious it is to be yourself. He knows because he spent 1,000 years being someone else. This is perhaps the closest thing to a lesson that Simon's story offers. And it is a lesson that the show delivers so quietly that you might not hear it over the sound of your own breathing as you drift toward sleep. The lesson is not that suffering makes you strong. The lesson is not that everything happens for a reason. The lesson is simpler and harder. You are you. Right now, in this moment, you are you. You know your name. You know the names of the people you love. You can hold a thought from its beginning to its end. You can remember yesterday. You can plan for tomorrow. These are not small things. These are extraordinary things. They are the things that Simon lost and that Simon, against all odds, got back. And they are the things that you have right now, tonight, as you listen to this. As your eyes close and your breathing slows and the world outside your window goes on doing whatever it does while you are sleeping. You are you. It will not always be this way. Nothing is always anyway. But right now, tonight, you are here. And you are yourself, and that is something worth knowing, even if you never think about it. Even if you take it for granted. Even if it never occurs to you that the simple act of being the person you are is a privilege that not everyone, not even a fictional antiquarian in a fictional post-apocalyptic world, gets to keep. Simon stayed. That is the quiet triumph of his story, the small, stubborn victory buried beneath 1,000 years of loss. Through all of it, through the crown, and the war, and the madness, and the long centuries of being someone else, some part of Simon stayed. Not his memories, not his name, not his understanding of who he was or what he had been or why any of it mattered, but something deeper than all of that, something the crown could not reach, something that sat at the bottom of his consciousness like a stone at the bottom of a river, unmoved by the current, unchanged by the water that flowed over it for 1,000 years, smooth and solid and utterly itself. Call it love, call it stubbornness, call it the irreducible core of selfhood that persists even when everything else has been stripped away, the last light in the last room of a house that has been gutted by fire. Whatever you call it, it is what kept Simon alive, not the crown's magic, not the ice powers, not the immortality the crown granted against his will, but this thing, this quality, this refusal to completely disappear, this insistence on existing even when existence had been redefined beyond recognition. And Marceline stayed, Betty stayed, the people who loved him stayed, in their own ways, through their own forms of loss and transformation, through their own long struggles with the grief and the confusion and the exhausting, thankless, endless work of loving someone who cannot love you back in the way you need to be loved. They stayed because that is what you do when you love someone who is disappearing. You stay. You visit the Ice King even though he does not know you and never will. You jump through a portal into an unknown future and spend years trying to cure a curse you may never understand. You carry a stuffed bear named Hambo for 1,000 years because a man who no longer exists gave it to you when you were crying. You sing a duet with a stranger who is wearing the face of your father. You stay because staying is the only verb that love reliably conjugates, the only action that love consistently performs, across every language and every century and every possible configuration of the human heart. The story of Simon Petrikov is the story of everyone who has ever watched someone they love disappear. It is the story of every child who has sat across from a parent who does not recognize them, who has introduced themselves by name to a person who gave them that name, who has answered questions they have answered 1,000 times before with patience they did not know they had. It is the story of every spouse who has learned to answer to the wrong name because the right name is gone and the wrong name is all that is left. And the wrong name is still spoken with something that sounds, if you listen carefully, like love. It is the story of every person who has held the hand of someone who is physically present and mentally elsewhere, and who has chosen to keep holding that hand anyway, not because it helps, not because it changes anything, not because the person on the other end of that grip knows who is gripping, but because the act of holding on is its own meaning, its own reason. its own small and stubborn defiance against the void that takes everyone eventually. Crown or no crown, magic or no magic, Alzheimer's or simply the slow, ordinary erosion of time. And if you are lying there in the dark, listening to this, and you know this feeling, if you know what it is to love someone who is disappearing, if you know the weight of carrying a memory that no one else shares, if you know the exhaustion of hope that rises and falls with the rhythm of good days and bad days, then you know why Simon Petrikov's story matters. You know why a cartoon about a blue man in a crown can make grown adults weep. You know why this particular narrative among all the narratives Adventure Time constructed across its magnificent run is the one that people come back to, the one that stays with them, the one they carry in their minds the way Marceline carries Hambo, as proof that someone, somewhere, understood what they were going through, and put it into a form that honored its complexity and did not look away. Adventure Time told this story inside a cartoon about a magical land full of candy people and sentient clouds, and a dog who can turn into a car. It told it over the course of 10 seasons and 283 episodes and 4 Distant Land specials, and a 10-episode spin-off series across 8 years of original broadcast and 5 more years of continuation. It told it with patience and precision and an emotional honesty that most prestige dramas never approach, that most self-consciously serious television never achieves. It told it through a character who started as a punchline, a joke villain, a blue man who kidnapped princesses because he was lonely, and who became, over the course of all those episodes and all those years, one of the most fully realized portraits of human suffering and resilience and love in the history of the medium. Not just animation, the medium of storytelling. The medium of narrative art. Simon Petrikov stands alongside the great tragic figures of literature, not because his story is grand or mythic or traditionally heroic, but because it is true, because it captures something essential and universal and deeply painful about what it means to be a person who exists in time, who changes, who is changed, who loses and is lost. Simon Petrikov was an antiquarian. He studied old things, things left behind by people who no longer exist. He did not know when he put that crown on his head in a shop in Scandinavia all those centuries ago that he was about to become one of those things, a relic, an artifact, a remnant of a person who used to exist, preserved in a form that bears only a superficial resemblance to the original. But the people who loved him refused to let him become a relic. They refused to let him be categorized and shelved and forgotten. They kept him alive not through magic, not through science, not through any of the spectacular means that Adventure Time's mythology makes available, but through the simple, exhausting, unglamorous work of remembering, of staying, of showing up, of loving someone who could not love them back in the way they needed, and doing it anyway, and doing it again, and doing it tomorrow, and doing it the day after that, and doing it until the doing became its own form of faith. Its own quiet proof that the person underneath the ice was real, and mattered, and deserved to be remembered. There is a tape. It is old. The image is warped and jittering. A man with dark hair and round glasses sits in front of the camera, and he says his name. He says he is an antiquarian. He says he bought a crown from a dock worker in northern Scandinavia. He does not know what is about to happen to him. He does not know that the crown will take his mind, his identity, his love, his name, his face, his voice, his capacity for coherent thought. He does not know that a little girl will carry a stuffed bear he gave her for 1,000 years. He does not know that his fiancée will leap across time to save him and then sacrifice herself to a cosmic entity to protect him. He does not know that 1,000 years from now he will sit in a small apartment in a world he does not recognize and try to figure out how to keep living. All he knows, in this moment, is that something is wrong, and he wants to leave a record of who he was before it gets worse. He looks at the camera. He speaks clearly. He says, "Remember me." If this is the kind of quiet, thoughtful content you enjoy falling asleep to, subscribing is free and it lets us keep making these for you. Thank you for staying. Good night, everyone. Sleep well.